today's video is about American Horror Story, the first series, so Murder House, as it's now come to be known. Originally, it was just American Horror Story.
Yeah,
So I've seen it lots of times.
yeah.
What was your opinion overall of it?
Interesting. I wouldn't necessarily call it bad, but I don't necessarily call it good either. It's the term I've generally come to describe first series, which are sort of halfway there, is this idea of a proof of concept
Hmm.
series where it's not necessarily really good yet, but it's all about showing the potential of the thing
Yeah.
rather than how rather than being something that's really good from the off.
Okay. So when you say that, what was good and what was bad about it?
I think the good element of it was that a lot of the characters were quite well psychologically drawn in how they represented certain states
Hmm.
of people of mind, but there wasn't much in the way of characterization to sort of build on that.
Right.
So like the majority of the series, it kind of feels more like it's a personality trait rather than a full if like a person.
But is that because of the fact that most of them are ghosts and that they are maybe left as just that personality traits? The thing that's left of them is that.
To a degree, but also I think with the actual characters in and of themselves, there doesn't appear to be much characterization there.
Right. Okay.
It feels more like plot development than actual character.
Okay. I suppose it is. Looking back on it, it's always been seen as the one that was all about self-indulgence and selfishness and
Mm.
very much narcissism, I suppose, to an
Yeah,
extent. So that does make sense that is what it is. And maybe I look back on it with, again, when you're watching back something that you've seen various times, it maybe you see it differently. And also it is the one that is gone back to so many times
yeah,
throughout the that and Coven, the third series, are the two that they kind of link back into other stories, which probably gives the characters more depth in time.
yeah,
But they're already dead by that point because obviously
yeah,
they're all dead. Uh, so yeah, because you do see an end. That at some point there is an end to the Tate Violet situation where it ends with
mm,
them not talking to each other. There is more to it later.
yeah.
Um, but that's it's much later. You're talking 8 years later.
Right.
Um, but I suppose what they were trying to do was show what the foundations of the series. I mean, it's nowhere the same at all.
Yeah,
It is ironically seen as one of the better series of all of them. But I think maybe that is a nostalgia thing because of the
yeah,
gothic style of it and
yeah.
how also putting it in its time. So I'm not 100% certain when it would have been. It would have been around 2000,
11?
2011, maybe 2010, because there was a gap between series, because we're on series 12, 11, 12. So it might be 2010, I think, maybe it came out. So putting it into that time period, having somebody acting in a film, for instance, that had Down syndrome is not something that would have ever really
No,
have been done before.
no.
Um, and Again, yeah, so I suppose it is maybe it is a matter of looking back on it because, as you know, as an anthology,
Yeah,
it's different that
yeah,
in
each
each
series is
series,
different.
each series it's the same people playing
Yeah,
different characters, and maybe it's that the character, not the characters have necessarily grown on you, but the actor playing the
mm,
character, and you've seen their growth as an actor
yeah,
throughout the series as in different roles because
yeah.
it's usually in a series you don't see that
No,
because what you see is the growth within that character. You don't see the
yeah,
growth within that person's acting because you don't see them playing different
yeah.
people within a series. So, um, yeah, it'd be interesting to see whether it is a matter of looking back on it because I started watching it when it was. I think I saw series three first. I don't think I actually saw series one first. Yeah, it must have been. I think Coven was on when I was on TV and I was actually watching it.
Yeah,
But I started watching it when it was close to the end of the series, but I started watching it back because it was back when you had. I think I had Virgin with TiVo, so you could watch the series back,
yeah,
like you can now, but not quite the same.
yeah,
Um, and I started watching it on series three. 'Cause series four was the first one I watched the whole way through. Um, and then I went back to series one, and then watched series one, two, and probably watched three again, and then four. So I can't really say, I suppose,
yeah.
whether I was looking back on it as a
Mm,
from the actor's perspective, going, "Oh, I really like those in that." So did I make
mm,
allowances? Maybe. Um,
yeah, because it's kind of because I think in many ways the lack of characterization may be what gave it the status it did
mhm.
initially because it is something that is very different in that
Yeah.
sense. But and I think if you're someone who's probably more genre minded, it might play better. I don't know.
Right. I don't know. Um, I don't know because critically speaking, it has been criticised very positively, even from
Mm,
critics,
yeah,
on the way it's written because it's meant to be written and it's meant to be written and presented in a Gothic style,
yeah,
which it would that would be how Gothic style would be because it'd be
yeah,
quite the way that it would be it'd be very surface level.
yeah,
If you think of things like Rocky Horror Picture Show, that's very surface level.
yeah,
Those kinds of films are
yeah,
Gothic films are quite surface level in the way they are, and they don't really
yeah,
give characters much depth. And more, it's more about telling the story. I mean,
yeah.
Dracula doesn't really tell you a
No,
huge amount of history around Dracula,
no,
and it doesn't really build it as a character.
no.
We've given Dracula a lot
Yeah,
more. So
yeah, because it's a history novel where you're reading the letters of I think it's Jonathan Harker, is it?
I think so, yeah. And maybe that's why that's got that feeling to it, and it's meant to feel.
Yeah,
I know when Ryan Murphy has spoken about it, it's meant to feel surface level. It's meant to
yeah,
feel like you can't really truly know these people
yeah,
because that's the point of it.
yeah,
They
because
don't know each other, so they're
yeah,
not.
uh,
So then and they're all of them are hiding something.
yeah,
Everybody's got a secret. They're living in the dead. So
yeah,
the dead. The reason why they're there is because of the fact that
can't move on.
they can't move on because of, I suppose, the historic thing of ghosts is that they
Yeah,
can't move on because they have unfinished business. But
yeah,
also the house has a part to play in keeping them there.
yeah,
But are people? The question is, are people? For me, people drawn to that house in the first place because of the fact there's something missing in their life?
yeah,
The Harmons moved there because of the
yeah,
fact that he's had an affair and
yeah,
she can't really truly forgive him for it.
yeah,
Violet is extremely damaged as a human being. Although you'd think when you first saw her, she wasn't actually that damaged. She was actually really together with everything,
yeah,
but she's really not.
yeah,
Um, but then if you look at the gay couple, I can't remember the names of them. Their relationship is extremely rocky.
yeah,
He's having affairs, and the other one wants them to have a life that's not there. So everybody
yeah,
who's that starting off from that original relationship between the doctor and his wife,
yeah,
their relationship is bad,
yeah,
and it is kind of like a story of everybody who's there. It comes from this place of sadness within relationships,
yeah,
or they've done something really bad, or something really bad's happened to them.
yeah,
But the question is, and isn't really answered, did Tate do what he did because of the fact he was predisposed to that, or did he do what he did because he lived in the house?
yeah,
And it had traumatized him by living in that
yeah.
house.
Because even in occult circle, particularly in occult circles, you do get this belief that uh, not only a place is haunted, but you need to cleanse them of the trauma
Yeah,
that's there.
it's like a collectiveness because there's never really an answer to that. There's not there's a kind of an assumption that it's built the whole old school way of thinking it of it that it's built on some kind of Indian burial ground or something like that.
Yeah,
But there's no actual answer
yeah,
to what it is, other than there's a belief that houses hold stuff,
yeah,
and I think maybe we've got this feeling around houses that they do hold things to do with us personally
yeah,
because we live our lives in them.
yeah, and particularly in when the time when the Gothic novel was at its prominence,
Hmm.
the because like there's an entire subgenre of Gothic novels which is known as Southern Gothic, which is to do with Southern America, obviously.
Yeah,
But a lot of the time then it was very much these harsh, austere environments that these houses were in,
yeah,
and so it kind of plays to that.
yeah. The whole Gothic era,
Yeah,
there's a whole the whole architecture side of it is the
yeah,
fact that buildings are important during in the Gothic era,
yeah,
and I think that's meant to be but I think it's meant to be also very much open to interpretation as a series as well.
yeah,
I don't think Ryan Murphy was trying to say this is the way to think about it. I think he wanted people to make
yeah,
their own assumptions about it, which can
yeah,
sometimes again make it feel a bit lacking because you're allowing it to be
yeah,
open ended.
yeah,
And I suppose it's meant to make people feel like if you can't know the character, you'll make up something about them.
yeah,
You'll try to find a way of explaining them and are they good or are they bad?
yeah,
Because you would automatically assume all of the spirits that are in the house are bad
yeah,
because they act in a bad way.
mm,
But is the question is does the house make them a bad person? So when they die, they're a bad person,
yeah,
and therefore are a bad spirit.
mm, yeah. Because uh, as I was saying, it was odd because I could understand what it was doing, but it wasn't. I could never get a grip on it in a sense
Mm-hmm.
because of that lack of detail. So it's
It jumps a lot.
yeah,
I did notice that this time watching it because I knew I was analysing it.
yeah,
It storylines jump quite quickly, and
yeah,
they don't always finish. You don't
yeah,
always get an end to.
yeah. Because it felt like things moved, but it never. There was never much weight felt. There's no like. It felt there was much weight to the things that happened until much later on.
Yeah,
It's like there's a house invasion, but everyone just seems to get over it, and things like that, where it's very much a stylistic choice, but it doesn't help with the grit.
yeah. But again, is that not showing? Is the house invasion and them not feeling as bad as you'd expect them to do
Mm.
about it, showing the trauma they've been through in the past and how
Yeah.
it. I mean, I don't think it would.
No.
I don't think your trauma in your past would make a house invasion of that, certainly to that level.
Yeah.
I don't know how easily you would get over that, and I don't think you
Yeah.
just go, "Oh, it's just another thing that happened."
Yeah.
Um, I think it's definitely got a lot of stuff around trauma in it. It's
Yeah.
meant to be certainly about that. Um, it's I think I suppose it is quite a complicated but simple series at the same time.
Yeah.
It's hard to explain because you've got so many different storylines going on,
Yeah.
and it's kind of really a flashback series to an extent as well.
Yeah. Because there's a lot of it back in time, and I was just thinking about it, and I think part of the reason why it was hard to get a grip on might have been to do with that. Whilst it is about trauma, there's not much visually to differentiate it in the sense
Mm.
that, like, when it's back in time, it is more monochrome.
Yeah,
But then when it's in modern day, it's just very normal lighting, very normal setup. It doesn't. There's not much of a visual atmosphere
yeah,
to visually translate it being traumatic. I think that might be part of it. I don't know because I think if it was more visual like that, then I think it might have been more easy to get a grip on
yeah.
in that sense, maybe.
I'd be interested to see if you watched it back a second time, what you thought on it was.
Yeah,
Knowing more about what's going to happen, does that make
yeah,
not knowing the thing? Because we all know that no matter how much you remember of a TV series, when you watch it back the
you'll
next
always
time,
pick up on more
and I
things.
do wonder whether that's necessary as well to
Yeah,
truly understand the series, is that
yeah,
you
'cause-
need to know there's some bits of maybe because of the flashbacking situation
yeah,
and because of the Tate situation at the end, finding
mm,
out what Tate
yeah,
did that work as late on as you found out about it?
yeah,
Was that should that have maybe been something that was
yeah. Because
because it was kind of touched on earlier, but not
yeah,
really.
because one of the things I also do think is that it probably didn't need to be as long as it did.
Right.
It felt like you could have probably put it down. Like there's a bit in the middle where it's definitely slowed down,
Hmm.
and I think you could probably do a version of it that moved faster, and you wouldn't necessarily lose that much.
Right.
Maybe.
Unless that was a purposeful thing.
Yeah.
Unless the slowing down was a
Yeah.
purposeful thing in the middle to make it feel like you were. That is one thing that I have found with Ryan Murphy is it can feel a bit rushed at the end.
Right.
It does feel like he has to. It feels like he puts a web of different storylines out there. Not in
Yeah.
all series, but just some series when it's a lot of characters.
Yeah.
Some series is that there aren't that many characters in.
Yeah.
Whereas others there's lots of characters, and this is one where there's lots.
Yeah.
And sometimes it does feel like he's going, well, I've got to end that storyline for that person, I've got to end that storyline for others.
Yeah.
And sometimes he also doesn't end storylines, and in some ways, I'd rather the storyline not end than it be rushed,
Yeah.
because at least then you can, like, as we've said before, you can give that storyline to that character.
Yeah.
Whereas if you rush a storyline at the end, which I just don't know whether he's purposely then done this like slowness in the middle, and
Yeah.
that's not quite worked because it's then
So
sped up the end too
yeah,
much.
because
Whereas if you stretch the end out a bit more and sped the middle up a bit,
yeah, because one of the things I was thinking about as you were talking then was that in theory it doesn't actually necessarily to be that much longer in terms of what's actually going on.
yeah,
Because within the events that it has, instead of moving through the events as quickly as it does,
hmm,
it theoretically could probably go through the events a bit slower with a bit more of an emphasis on the house,
hmm,
just to and the idea that is it the house that holds that's keeping people there
yeah,
a bit more because and I think that might as they have helped with the grip situation where it is like what it was doing was interesting but it is almost like it was very surface level and therefore is quite hard at least maybe on a second viewing it might work better
yeah,
because with obviously in the first time you're focusing on what is actually happening rather
yeah,
than the mood of the thing and I think in some ways generally things that tend to be very much more about the mood of the thing or things that aren't necessarily being embedded in a plot.
yeah,
And I think like when we watched what was it called? Uh Bridge End.
yeah,
That was I would argue probably something that was very much more on mood than actual events happening.
yeah,
And when it's more on mood you don't have as tightly packed plot
yeah,
and so it's more things are happening.
yeah,
And I think that might be where the issue came in is that it does have quite a bit of a plot to it,
hmm,
and so the mood never really sets in deep enough, at least for watching it one time through.
yeah.
That would make sense.
There's the thing is as well with it with Murder House. There's not really one through storyline. I suppose you could argue technically there's the Tate and Violet storyline and the I
Yeah,
suppose the Harmons in general, but
yeah,
because it does flashback so often and because it's got so many characters that are all kind of becoming intertwined with each other,
yeah,
there's not one true storyline through it that it keeps
yeah,
coming back to
yeah,
in any kind of substance.
yeah. So it feels very disparate in a sense as well.
It's kind of lots of little episodes of it, I mean, in the same place.
Yeah,
Um, but because I'm thinking about series as a head, just on the fact of
yeah,
how different it is. And Asylum, which is the next one, there's a very clear storyline that's running through all of it, and one main character,
yeah,
two main characters, but certainly one that is where the plot's based through.
yeah,
So, whereas there isn't that in this, because there isn't that character. There's not
yeah,
really because you've got the Harmons, which are and Tate, which
yeah,
and I suppose Constance to an extent as well.
yeah,
So you've got quite a lot of people who are prominent characters
yeah,
rather than people who are coming into it,
yeah,
and maybe maybe that makes it a little bit harder to grip onto. Maybe
yeah. Because
because you've got so many characters to deal with.
yeah, because that's why I'm quite interested to see what the future series are like.
Yeah.
Because I could definitely see what he's trying to do.
Hmm.
It's just hard to grip on.
Yeah.
So it'd be interesting to see in the future series how easy or not easy it is to
Hmm.
grip on. Because if it becomes easier to do that, then it makes sense that it's more of a developmental thing where it's a case
Yeah.
of doing it and then refining as you go through.
Yeah, I think I've said this to you before about American Horror Stories is that there's some hit and there's some miss series, and it'll be interesting to see which ones you think are the hit and miss because everybody has a different view of what hits and misses are. Because no, I don't think any series is bad,
No.
and I don't think any. But I think some series are really good for me
Yeah.
personally, and most people feel that way about it. It's
Yeah.
that it's got a very big following because of the fact that I think nobody really hates a series. I'm sure there are. I'm sure there's people who
Yeah.
have very strong opinions on it, but people who actually enjoy it,
Mm.
there's not one series that I would say I really don't like, but because they're so differently themed and have such different concepts and different filming styles and different
Mm.
same actors but
Yeah.
different ways of doing it. Um, you've got you always have your favourites and your least favourites, and I would
Yeah.
fight. I'd like because for me, Murder House is in the middle. It's always been in the middle. It's kind of always been what it's all built around anyway, and
Yeah.
it kind of feels right that it's in the middle of it. Some are better, some are worse, in my view.
Yeah. Because I can remember there's one point in it when I think it's when it was revealed that Violet had died several weeks
Mm.
back, and then I said, but didn't she end up leaving the house and going to see the
There was
and then
there was a plot hole there, yeah,
and
which I've
I
missed.
and I was and when I said that I was like I wasn't sure if that came before that or after that, and it
Yeah, I'm still not certain whether that is the case, and potentially it is a plot hole that she did
yeah
go around to Constance's house
yeah
after she was dead. But on a second viewing, you'll know
yeah
that because you'll know when she does those two things.
yeah
But then that's the problem with time flipping around as much as it is to an
yeah
extent.
is it
Do you know when things have happened, and
yeah
does that then give the writer leeway to be
yeah
able to get away with plot holes,
yeah
which then is a little bit. I mean, there are some series of American Horror Story which really do overuse flashbacks and flash forwards.
yeah
It is used a lot, but I think that is because they've got to build quite a big. Within 10 episodes, they've got to give you everything. It's
yeah
that they know it's only going to be that one series. They know it's not going to be. They're not going to have another run of that series
yeah
again. So they've got to be really clear on that, and I think it has to be done. But there are some where I feel, and looking back on Murder House, there's a lot of flashbacks
yeah
because they've got to tell all of those stories, and I do wonder whether that makes it a little bit more difficult
yeah because
to sort of feel an affinity to the characters because you're not getting enough time with them.
yeah and I think another part of it was that there were some characters that I was able to get a bit more of a grip on. That's because uh, in many ways, I think some of them had a bit more, in a sense, almost range. In that, with a lot of them, they are either dealing with or have trauma in them.
Mm.
And it's like with the guy in the gay couple who really wants to settle down and have a family.
Yeah,
There's sometimes where his character is more serious, and then others where he's very comedic.
yeah,
And so I think as well that probably didn't help with the grip issue is that with a lot of them, because of the nature of the series, they are kind of very stuck into one
trope and
emotional range, as it were, rather than
yeah, yeah, and I do. I'd be intrigued to have a conversation with Ryan Murphy about it and ask him, did he mean to do that? Did he mean to what? Because I don't think I've ever seen anything he's done where he's actually said that.
yeah,
Yes, not to know them, he said,
yeah,
but were they meant to be one dimensional because of the fact that they were only really meant to depict that very moment that they died, and they
yeah,
all died in a traumatic situation
yeah,
in a pretty flat way of being, and they were
yeah,
all in that they'd all kind of got to a point where they were being controlled by a presence of some sort by that
yeah,
point. So do they then keep that sin that they were originally with. So,
yeah,
um, for instance, Tate was clearly anger.
yeah,
He was angry all the time, but then was very around Violet was able to control that
yeah,
generally, but it was actually his anger that made her commit suicide. So
yeah,
it was that which I'd only really thought about this time watching it. It was
mm,
his anger that had made her make that decision
yeah,
because he basically told her to do
yeah,
it, which is quite a scary concept.
yeah,
That's where he'd been when he said it, and she then did it because of the fact that he was angry. So his is very much anger based, whereas the gay couplet's very much kind of lust, but then there's a sprinkling of sort of I know this isn't a sin, but uh, sort of resentment towards each other.
yeah.
That was kind of what really
Antipathy?
drove them. Yeah, yeah. There's a lot of sarcasm between the two of them, and all their conversations seem to be
Yeah.
very pointed.
Almost passively aggressive.
Yeah. Whereas some of the others, it was there's more. The guy that's burnt, but he's still alive. So
Yeah,
is he still alive? I can't remember actually now.
yeah,
Yeah, he is still alive. Um, but he's very manipulative the way he
yeah,
is. He's trying to manipulate the situation. Moy was obviously lost
yeah,
because of the fact that if you're a woman or
yeah,
not somebody she wants to fancy, she looks older and then she looks younger when she needs to.
yeah,
Um, it's because again, she's seems like a very flat character, but I know later on her character's built hugely built later on.
mm,
She doesn't get very much airtime on the next time she's on, but what happens is hugely telling about her as a person. But you get a lot more about a lot of them. So
yeah.
I do wonder whether now when I think back of it, I'm more protective of it in my head because of the things that have happened around it since.
Yeah,
Um, but yeah, as a series, but I can see how that would be your
yeah.
conclusion to it.
Because generally, the way I describe it is it felt like things were happening rather than things were being moved a lot of the time,
Yeah,
which in traditional ways of writing is generally not seen as a good way to write.
yeah,
It kind of does work for what it's trying to do, and I
mhm,
can see why you'd write that way to try and do what they were doing.
yeah,
But at that same time, it stops the characters from actually having any drive, and it's just more like things are happening. You
yeah. Because apart
pass a
from
good thing.
apart from dying, there's not really any jeopardy in the series either.
No,
You already know to an extent that the Harmon's going to split up. You know
yeah,
that their relationship's over. Um, the relationship between Tate and Violet is quite. There's not really much to it.
no, it's very straightforward.
Yeah. It's very intense, but other
Yeah,
than that, but you expect that with teenagers,
yeah,
especially teenagers that have gone through trauma.
yeah,
And I mean, obviously, you don't know throughout that Constance is Tate's mum, but so again, I'm looking at that. Looking back, is that you'd
mm,
expect having Constance as a mother probably would end up
mm,
with you being quite the way he is, and certainly probably ended up the reason why he goes and does what he does at the school.
yeah,
Um, but I suppose it's not very. I don't really know. It feels a little bit like each story is very similar within
yeah,
it, and it's kind of telling the same story over and over again. And maybe that is a
yeah.
purposeful thing.
And that would fit with what I was saying about how a lot of the characters within it didn't feel to have much emotional range in it.
Hmm.
Like there's the gay couple, which are probably the bit that I remember the most, partly because of how different their dialogue was. It was very passive aggressive and nippy at each other.
Yeah. Whereas the rest of it was either angry
Yeah,
or indifferent to each
yeah,
other.
or depressive, and so it's
Yeah, they seem like the. But see, that's quite interesting. I've never really thought this before. But they seem like the most alive out of all of the ghosts.
yeah,
But they were the last ones to die. So is it that
yeah,
over
that
time they become more
yeah,
depressed,
hollowed
to
out.
become more how the house is.
Yeah,
Um, so they kind of morph into the house as time goes on.
yeah. Because I think if that is the case, it might have been an idea to try and rather than just have that be there as a potential underlying logic, just because there's a difference between allowing open interpretation and then just saying, "Oh yes, we wanted it to be open," but then just it being the case of we didn't put that in. So yes, you can see that from that, but
Yeah,
we didn't put that in there. So
yeah,
there's a difference between allowing for interpretation and then just being a case of, well, you can see that inside if you want.
yeah. But then I suppose how do you do that if you're going to allow everything to be open to interpretation? Then, but then I suppose you
Well,
shouldn't. So it's
yeah, because this is one of the things that is one of the first arguments that you'll come into when you are looking actually into particularly literary criticism is how much do you allow to be accidental interpretation and how much is no, this is a case of you people can see that into it, but it's not only what you intended, but it's just
yeah.
you pretending to be doing something that you weren't.
Yeah, I suppose there is a possibility that it's because it just wasn't thought of to write it about that.
Yeah,
Um, there is going to be that in this. There is a lot of that. There is a lot of interpreting, trying to interpret what part the house plays, and like that situation. Is it that the ghosts are more depressive the longer they've been there because the one
yeah,
that's been there the longest is crying all the time, but
yeah,
she was crying all the time in life as well, so
yeah.
she was
So
quite depressive. Because I've
yeah,
always wondered whether she is what holds everything into the house because she's an extremely unhappy woman.
yeah,
Her husband does what he does. Obviously, can't really go into what he does with the baby, but what happens with the baby situation.
yeah,
Um, she that obviously hugely traumatic to her. Already extremely depressed as a person,
yeah,
was clearly going through postnatal depression,
yeah,
and she then unalived herself because of the situation
yeah,
and her husband. So and they were the first ones to die in the house.
yeah,
So was it? So is it all her
yeah.
sucking the any kind of happiness out of that house?
And I think this is where I think I might have cracked what we were just talking about is that so like saying it's up to you to make an interpretation, but you've got to have the things there to provide multiple interpretations rather than just people throwing stuff and seeing what sticks.
Yeah, yeah. Unless you want everybody to have a
Yeah,
different viewpoint on it,
yeah,
then if you want somebody if that to be the case, then
yeah,
leave it as open as possible because
yeah,
then anybody can make whatever decision
yeah,
they want about it.
yeah.
Um,
Because one of the things I always found interesting about, for example, the Matrix trilogy is that they've said that with that it's meant to be open to interpretation.
yeah,
Yet you'll get some people who will say after the first one it's all really rubbish, and then you'll get other people who have like philosophers and say no, there's actually a through line to it all.
yeah.
And so
But you have to pay attention to it
yeah,
or
and
understand the concept behind it.
yeah, that's in many ways just the eternal issue of perception.
Yeah,
Is what did you actually intend to put into being perceived by people, and what is actually just then and after the fact you went, oh yes, well we intended it to be vague on purpose.
yeah.
So how much you bullshit out
But,
in
but does it
bullshit out
matter if you? But in a way, does it matter if you do bullshit
Hmm.
because if people are coming up with interpretations of what you've done,
Yeah,
then they are considering the art that you've created, regardless of whether you intended to do it or not. It might
yeah,
actually mean that in reality it was rubbish because
yeah,
of the fact that you have left it to open to interpretation.
yeah,
But
yeah,
for somebody to make an assumption about it, they
yeah,
have to think about it.
yeah,
There's many things that I watch and I don't think about after I've watched
yeah,
it. I'll go, that was rubbish,
yeah.
and then
And I
don't think
think
about it
I'm
again.
generally this is quite interesting. Is that I'm generally the opposite to that. Interestingly, if I will only watch something if I think I'm going to get something. Generally speaking, so that's
Yeah. So you've got to be.
yeah,
I think again with some American Horror Story series, you are going to have to make your own interpretations of
yeah,
things, whereas others it's very specific on what the
yeah,
storyline is. But when it comes to the supernatural side of it, with American Horror Story, you will probably have to use your own interpretations of it. I
yeah,
don't feel like Ryan Murphy likes to put things down on supernatural stuff because they don't actually exist.
yeah,
So I feel like he allows it to be open to interpretation
right,
to
yeah,
an extent, so that there's not because there is
yeah,
something that happens in the next series which doesn't make sense, and I know it won't.
yeah,
It doesn't make sense to anybody. Nobody really knows why this thing happens, and it something that's been questioned the whole way through it, and this situation has been asked why they've not repeated it, and then unfortunately in series, I think it was series 10, yeah, series 10, they repeated it and it didn't work, and I knew it wouldn't work, and I didn't want them to do that they
Yeah.
do. I'll explain to you
When we get to it.
when we do it, when we watch it. But I quite like the fact it makes no sense that it's in the series, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Um, because it is kind of out there and makes no sense why it's there.
Yeah.
It feels like it starts because it bookends the series as well.
Yeah.
That thing bookends the series, but it's never really it's touched on slightly in the middle,
Yeah.
but not explained.
Right.
And I think that's purposely done so that you can take interpretation from it.
Right.
So I think that there is an element of you're going to have
Yeah.
to do that with things. I do feel like the next series as they do the actual storytelling better,
Yeah.
and there is much more of a building of characters and building
Mm.
back histories in a more meaningful way,
Yeah.
and also more time in the current as well.
Yeah.
A lot more, definitely in the next two series. I think three series is.
Yeah.
I'm really intrigued to know what your thoughts are on Freak Show, which is the fourth series. I really struggled with it when I first watched it,
Right.
but it's now one of my favourites. But I've
Mm.
had to watch it back a few times to get it,
Yeah.
to understand what they were trying to portray in it.
Because and one of the things that I've been thinking about in terms of how to approach an artist more recently is around the idea of aesthesis, which is an ancient Greek word for sensation or perception,
Mhm.
and around whether, and it's a more utilitarian approach really to an artist where it might be good, it might be bad, but but one of the things that's becoming increasingly apparent to me, and this is over years and years and years of thinking about this, is how do you actually analyse something? Because when you are analysing something that is symbolic,
Yeah.
you cannot actually provide a rigid framework for
No.
analysing something that is symbolic. You can provide you can provide a broad framework on what things you should discount and what things you should bring to bear.
Yeah.
But that's only a very broad framework. You can't actually do anything that is actually rigorous in terms of an artist and how much it is just relational. So it's how you relate to the thing you're viewing, or how you
Which
relate
is
to the thing
very
you're reading.
specific to each person watching it.
Yeah,
That's the thing.
and
So when
that's
people
yeah,
review things, because for me,
yeah,
kind of going off track on the American Horror Story side of things, but for me, quite often, films that get Oscars are not films I have enjoyed, or I feel like they're just ones that have been the the biggest selling ones that year.
yeah,
The ones that have shouted the loudest, basically.
yeah,
Whereas there's other films that I watched that are much lesser down in
yeah,
that, but I would have personally given them an Oscar
yeah.
because. But I'm sure everybody feels that way. I'm
Oh
sure
yeah,
everybody feels that their film is not the one that's going
yeah.
to be
Because
picked.
my general view on things like that is that with films that do the Oscars, quite often, yeah, it deserves it, but it's kind of obvious. It's
Yeah,
like the whole point of for me, the whole point of awards ceremonies is to pick out things that shouldn't be obvious.
yeah, yeah. And they do it sometimes at the
Yeah,
Oscars because I'm pretty sure Parasite wasn't very big
no,
before it got the Oscar, and then when it got the Best Picture Oscar, I think every people then went. Well, I certainly did. I didn't
yeah,
watch it prior to it, and I watched it afterwards.
yeah.
Don't think I'd ever heard of it before the
Yeah,
Oscars.
because from what I've heard, for All Quiet on the Western Front was kind of similar in that it was certainly probably more prominent than Parasite was beforehand, but that very much had a boost in the aftermath of that.
Yeah, I suppose that is what it does. But anyway,
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
completely off the
that's
point of
tangenting.
American Horror. So I suppose it's not really.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
sort of talking about how people perceive things, but
yeah,
it's. Uh, I think it'll be an interesting thing for you to when you have watched maybe even just a few more series is where you are with it, but certainly after you've watched season 8, and then there's also the side program that's American Horror Stories, which there's
yeah,
two or three in that are around the house as well.
yeah.
So there's a lot more lore to come out of it,
Right.
and a lot more plot line that comes both on the actual people who are
Yeah,
there, but also further back
yeah,
and that type of thing. So you get more information later,
yeah,
and more story to it, which may help with with that
Yeah.
that you're feeling with that sort of supposed 2D-ness of the
Yeah.
characters. But I do wonder whether it is that they're purposely 2D
Yeah.
because of,
Yeah.
or it was just done and then they've
Yeah.
used that as a way of saying that that's the
Mm.
reason why. 'Cause
Yeah.
it could be that Ryan Murphy just wrote them as wooden characters,
Yeah.
didn't realize that they had, and then it was.
Yeah.
But yeah, it'd be interesting to see how you see it after a few more series.
Yeah.
But they are like I say, they're very very different. So um, from I suppose do the same thing as with last time. Though, if you might not have one, but who we said really it's the gay couple that were
Yeah.
the best characters. But who was your favourite out of it?
No, because no, because I didn't really have a favorite character as such because there wasn't much
Hmm.
to like I said before, uh, rip onto. So in a sense, it was like they were all superficial. And there's there's definitely a level of intentionality there with the superficialness because either you would build them up or you just leave them like that for a reason. It's not. Uh, and so I think a lot of it with why I found the gay couple interesting to watch was just because you know, in terms of the range of things that they were doing, it was more emotionally varied than what everyone else around them was doing. So that kind of stood out more to me
Yeah.
than the other things because with a lot of the other elements, like I was saying, it's generally dealing with trauma or depression, and there's not much to distinguish all the different bits other than variations on the idea.
Yeah.
So even though it's not all the same, it tends to blend
Hmm.
more. So it's almost like looking at different shades of a colour rather than several different colours.
Yeah. Yeah, because I've just thought of something I said that I kind of mentioned before that I was now thought a little bit more about the repetitiveness of it, the fact that the same thing seems to be happening over and over again.
Yeah,
Maybe that's part of it
and
as
that
well
that
because
would
it is.
explain why I said it felt quite slow in the middle because if it's all very similar, then it will
You don't see it necessarily with
set
the gay
me
couple
more
in
interested.
exactly the same way,
No,
but the couple that come in at the end, the same thing's happening as what happened with Ben. He's waking up in the middle of the night.
yeah,
He's going downstairs, putting the oven
yeah,
on, standing over it.
yeah,
Though that same cycle's happening, so it's as if that cycle is what the house or whatever the entity is that's there that's doing it is creating the same thing over and over again. It's
yeah,
sort of driving that it's driving the man insane
yeah,
while kind of torturing the woman.
yeah,
And so maybe that cycle has kind of, and maybe that is why the gay couple's slightly different
yeah,
because they were a gay couple, not a man and a woman. So
yeah,
it didn't work quite the same way for them. That the
yeah,
house didn't really know how to deal with it.
yeah. Definitely.
I'm not saying it was intentional,
No,
but to give it
yeah,
more of a depth of it, it's just
yeah,
it. I mean, for me, just from a character building perspective, I find Constance the most awful woman in the world.
yeah,
But as a character,
yeah,
way more to her than any of the others.
yeah,
The fact that the one liners that she has and
mm,
the way she communicates with people is quite. It's showing her very jealous way of
yeah,
thinking. She's very, very jealous of everything around her.
yeah,
Um, that and that's how she's very jealous of Maid, obviously, because of the
yeah,
situation. But even the way she communicates with Vivian is very jealous. She's
yeah,
jealous that she's pregnant. She's
yeah.
jealous that
Very
she,
condescending.
yeah, she's jealous that she's relatively, or from her perspective, is relatively happy,
Yeah,
and that she's got good things in her life. And I find it interesting the way that she is so vile about Adelaide
yeah,
herself, but as soon as Vivian grabs her to say, "Don't you can't come into the house the way that you are,"
mm,
she gets very defensive of her. You
yeah,
ever touch my daughter again, and which you wouldn't have
yeah,
thought that of her. So there's
yeah,
clearly more there to her. She's
yeah. Because
devastated when she dies, but she locks her in a room full of mirrors to.
yeah, and it was interesting what you were saying about how she says, "Don't touch my daughter again." I when I saw that initially, I perceived that as her being, "You don't have the right to do that," and so I took a different view on that, which is interesting in of itself, because that might explain to me why. Because now you're talking about it, her character was probably not necessarily more complex, but had a lot more going on.
There was more storyline to it, and I
Yeah,
think that may have even been
yeah,
down to the point of the fact that she was in a different house.
yeah,
So you were seeing a life outside of the
yeah. And I
house.
think because of how, in a sense, confrontational she was as a character, I think that probably kept me bouncing off a lot more
Yeah.
rather than uh, managing to get a grip on it.
Yeah. Which could be the case across all of it because everybody, not a single one of them are really nice characters.
Yeah,
They're not welcoming.
yeah,
Again, I think that is intentional. I think
yeah,
not making them. I suppose Adelaide's the only one that's close to being
yeah,
nice, but she also isn't either. She can be very unpleasant.
yeah,
Um, yeah, there's not. I wouldn't say any of them were nice characters. I suppose Violet might be the one that's the closest to being nice,
but
but even
I think even
that's
that's probably more empathetic potentially rather than actually being nice. Because being empathetic doesn't mean the same thing as being nice. It means that you are able to perceive other
other people's
people's
reaction.
feelings a lot more.
Yeah, and then react to those feelings. But yeah, I can't say there is a single person in it that's likable.
Yeah,
Feel sorry for some people
yeah,
in it, but I don't like any of the characters. It's not just because I say Constance is my favorite character. She's
yeah,
kind of my favorite character for all the wrong reasons.
yeah.
She's my favorite character.
A bit like Margaret Beaufort.
Yeah, kind of. That she's because she's an unlikable person, and I mean, if I was around her, I'd absolutely despise her. But watching her on a TV show,
Yeah,
and I think it does actually does add quite a lot of depth to it, but not
yeah,
because she's a deep character, but because of the
yeah,
fact that it's like she's trauma dumping on the house as well. That she's going in
yeah,
there and going, well, I wasn't able to be the starlet that I thought I was going to be, and I
yeah,
ended up with these children, and she calls them the things she calls them, and says horrible things about them,
yeah,
and then still dotes on Tate, yet
yeah,
he did what he did,
yeah,
and then even to the point of where she's sending a dead boy to a psychologist.
yeah,
She's actually got him to go to the psychologist because she thinks that he's going to be able to change.
yeah,
Which I suppose now looking at it, if I'm right about what we're saying about the fact that once the house has got hold of them, there's no changing that.
yeah,
Then no matter what she did, it wasn't going to change.
yeah.
You can't psychoanalyze a ghost
No,
because they're going to be stuck very much. The
yeah,
very nature of them, they're going to be stuck where they are.
yeah,
They've got no ability to develop as a human being because they're no longer a human being. So
mm,
um, yet she's thought it would be a good idea to send her dead son to psychology.
yeah,
So yeah, I can see, I can like I say, I can see I can see your point on it. I don't agree, but I don't know whether I don't wholly agree, but I
yeah.
don't know
Because
whether, like I say, that's
I can see what you're saying. I don't see that yet. I might do if I saw it again.
yeah. It'd be interesting to. I think you do need to watch that. I don't think you'd have to watch all the series back, but I think you do. You will probably need to watch that series back, just because I think I just can't remember whether it was the first or the second time that I watched it. I don't know whether it was because I went back. I can't remember
Yeah,
what it is, but I know I do know I've seen more each time I've
yeah,
watched series one,
yeah,
whereas not necessarily the same for all the other series.
yeah,
Is I saw a lot more when I watched that series back because I was aware of what was coming
yeah.
next.
Because I can remember years and years. This is years and years and years back. I did start watching the first season. And I stopped. I think after episode 4, something like
I'd be
that.
intrigued to know how many people watched another series and then went back to watch
Yeah,
series one, and whether its popularity got bigger and then
mm,
went back to because
yeah,
some series do, some
yeah,
series it is you watch something later on in it and then you go I'll start watching it from the beginning and you've kind of already fallen in love with it by the time you go back
yeah,
to the beginning. Um, so I'd be intrigued to know how many people is
yeah,
the case and whether that is for me, whether I had
yeah,
because I think it would be easy to do that and go back and look at it from seeing the characters in a because the characters are played by people who are the same
yeah,
actors, if you kind of like the actor, you might give them a bit more credence
yeah,
in it when you're watching back how they were. I would say for definite, the person who plays Tate. Oh, why can't I remember his name? One of my favourite actors now.
Evan Peters.
Evan Peters. How did I not remember that? He's definitely grown as an actor, and
Yeah.
he is completely different but he's very different in every series.
Mm.
And Jessica Lang's very different in each series. She's the one that plays Constance,
Yeah.
and then Sarah Paulson as well.
Mm.
Very, very different in each one. The only thing that Sarah Paulson does is that she doesn't seem to be able to cry differently in anything. She always got the same cry, uh, and it can be quite annoying.
Yeah.
Uh,
Because one of the things I've found I've talked to my sister about is because my sister was at a performing arts college, and so I ended up doing a lot of things relating to acting, even though she was trained to be a dancer. She still did stuff relating to acting and accents as well.
mhm.
And one of the things I was saying to her is that one of the things I've generally found is that I can generally tell when acting's really bad,
Mm.
but and I can tell when it's really good. But apart from that, I've got no real. I'm not that good at picking up on acting.
Yeah,
So it's like acting doesn't necessarily have to be great, and I won't notice it. So
it has to be really bad for you to notice if it's
yeah,
really bad. Whereas
yeah,
there's a big middle ground of good and then
yeah,
excellent.
yeah,
I think most people are like that, to be honest with
yeah,
you. I think most people, unless you really are sitting there and analysing it, that
yeah,
you. I also think you make allowances. I think if you're
yeah,
enjoying the storyline, you'll make allowances.
yeah,
Whereas if you're not enjoying the storyline, you
yeah,
probably also would find any small annoyance with the acting would
yeah,
become more annoying.
yeah,
So you might think that somebody's acted really badly, but actually it hasn't. It's just a really
yeah,
poorly written storyline. So,
yeah,
but you've got to. I think in reality, you do have to go to those extremes with acting. You've got
yeah,
it either has to be really bad or really good. I think we can accept anything in the middle
yeah,
anyway, um, depending on story,
yeah,
depending on all of the other elements that make
yeah.
up the program.
But it's like what we're watching the other day about all the rubbish dinosaur films. Even I can say that is God.
Yeah. That wasn't even acting. But yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to see how you perceive the other ones and
Mm,
where that goes. 'Cause I'm pretty sure you'll like some of the series, and
yeah,
but I also know that there'll be certain ones that you have issues with, and I think I know some of the ones that you'll have issues with. Maybe not all of them, but um, there's definitely some that I think you'll have issues with the one that I was saying about where they shouldn't have gone back to that kind of that type of
yes, that's
situation.
series. That
So
was
it's
series 10.
series 10 going back to what was asked for over and over again after series 2.
Yeah,
I don't really know why he did it because he kept saying I don't want that thing in it
yeah,
again. So um, but like I say, Freak Show for me is the one I'm interested in knowing what you think because when I watched it, I was extremely busy at the time and I was
yeah,
watching it bit by bit, and I had some times where it was like 2 or 3 weeks between episodes,
yeah,
and I think that didn't help.
yeah,
And for me as well, American Horror Story, you kind of have to watch it as a binge watch.
yeah,
It is the best way of watching it, but with a break in the middle.
yeah,
So having sort of watching five when it's a 10 episode one, watching five, maybe having a few days, and then watching five again,
yeah,
um, because it can become too much watching it all together. But I think having too much time between all of it, you kind of forget some of the things that have happened because there's a
yeah,
lot of stuff. There's always a lot of stuff going on, no matter what
yeah,
series it is. There's always a lot of things that are going on. So which can work on two ways. One, it can make it so that it's a bit over the top to watch altogether,
yeah,
but it can also make it very difficult to watch separately over a time
yeah,
period because you forget the things that happened in it
yeah,
previously. So, yeah, I'd be interested to see where you go thought process on it
yeah,
afterwards, and if you do watch it back a second time, what your thoughts are on it the second
mm,
time watching it because
yeah,
like I say, it's been years and years and years since I originally started watching it, and I can't remember what my original thoughts were on that series. So
yeah.
it'd be interesting to see whether your view changes.